Can I pause for a second and just note that we got Brian on here who's getting Congressman Massey on, and our typical lineup includes like homeless people that believe in Bigfoot.
Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show, your source for common sense politics on the We Are Libertarians network. The Brian Nichols Show is the fastest growing liberty podcast that brings together people from all means of political thought as we seek to have meaningful conversations about the issues you care about. At the Brian Nichols Show, our goal is to leave the audience educated, enlightened, and informed. And now your host, Brian Nichols.
Well, happy Friday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show. And strap in, it's story time, special edition of the show. Michael Johns is returning to the program. And it's funny, this episode, it didn't intend to be really a story time episode, but it turned into this opportunity for us to really hear an insider scoop of decades of not only being fly on the wall for, oh my goodness, almost every big conservative moment that you can think of throughout conservative history, but also having direct impact on policy. Really a great chance for us to hear from Michael. So I wanted to go ahead and go right into the episode. A great chance. Sit back, just really absorb the information today. We'll go ahead and talk about it in the future episodes. With that being said, on to the show. Michael Johns returning to the Brian Nichols Show.
Wow, isn't it amazing how time flies? I mean, a few years gone by, and
2018. It was what, 3 years ago? It's already that quick. Where's time go, Mike? Oh my
and
gosh.
we were in the middle of what appeared to be a blossoming and hugely successful Trump first term. If you think about it.
What happened?
Well, we're going to talk about that. A few things that you may have heard of have developed. And none of them are very positive. They're all very threatening. And I start, unlike some conservatives, not as much with rage at the other side. I sort of have just come to expect the worst out of them. But I have great disappointment, frankly, in the way what I have always thought was a functioning conservative movement is handling what could not be greater threats to our sovereignty, to our electoral process, representative democracy, the things that are at the heart of our Constitution, and what I think is instinctually, but more than instinctually, based on knowledge that I've acquired for what that's worth, with 20 years of healthcare experience and a considerable degree of knowledge of how China's Communist Party operates. An operating thesis that this pandemic undeniably came out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The fact that we've been playing games on that fact for a year and a half is outrageous.
So, Michael, let's kind of start here because it's been, like I said before, a while since we last spoke. For the new audience members who aren't familiar with your past, let's kind of do a quick spark notes in terms of your history, and then let's dig into. I would love to start off. We'll talk about your experience with COVID.
Chronologically, because I don't really know how else.
Go for it.
Apparently, they tell people to write resumes thematically. I suppose maybe you could do that with me, because I would say it's not just the duration of time that I've been doing these things, but the versatile range of it. So here's how it started, essentially. I grew up in the Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania, which you know well, being a resident of the greater fantastic city of Philadelphia, loved by me, beloved by you, not beloved by anyone else. It's always Philly against the world, right, with the Eagles. But around 11th grade or so, I started to sort of awaken from my juvenile slumber and pay attention to the world. And one of the things that happened most immediately and significantly right around me was, the multi-year closure of Bethlehem Steel, which was then one of the largest, if not the largest employer in the region, providing really, well-paying jobs for hardworking, blue-collar American patriots mostly. And that company built some of the most iconic infrastructure in this country, including some of the, Golden Gate Bridge of Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Many of much of the military equipment, including that we utilized to win World War II. If you ever listen to that song Youngstown by Bruce Springsteen, where he talks about, in the lyrics, the verbiage of, working to make the bombs that won our country's war, and then returning to find a country that had sort of forgotten them. And so this was long before I don't know if Youngstown was out yet, but anyway, this was sort of my experience with Youngstown, and in Allentown, which itself got a groovy Billy Joel song around the same theme. And I watched the impact this had. It did not, fortunately, affect me immediately in any significant way. My parents were always at my sporting events, and my mom was a middle school then junior high, they called it, a teacher, and my dad moved around between a bunch of jobs, predominantly in publishing. So I kind of identified as kind of a part of that demographic, and both geographically and from growing up, and certainly not being, I grew up in a rugged, rough kind of environment that could have been a lot more rugged, a lot more rough. I'm not, trying to make it more than it is, but I played sports and all those things. Anyway, I started to just look at this Bethlehem Steel situation. I said, let me understand this. I said, we have Asian economies that are assisting their steel companies, which was then identified and still should be identified as a blossoming industry, crucial to infrastructure and to the future. And we're doing what? Nothing. We're just kind of, wishing these people well, or, telling them maybe we'll have some re-education program, or, honestly, they always try to, put on, a nice look and appearance to these closures, but you never get these companies jobs or that sort of compensation back. And this hits hard. So you take a typical family, that grew up around where I was, who may have had, maybe a dad working there, and, all of a sudden the mom's got to go look for work, which maybe she didn't really want to do. Maybe she wanted to be more of a full-time parent at home, or the dad's got to kind of like try to find some other type of work. And the steel industry is really complex. People don't study it, don't know that, but it's not the sort of thing you just kind of wake up and start doing. You spend a long time learning it. It's hard work. But once these people learned how to do it and became good at it, and it became part of their DNA. So that was the first time I said, what is our government doing? And I know that as a libertarian, you might believe that nothing, maybe it was, or maybe it's just one of those difficult questions. But so then that's experience one. Experience two, I then attend the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. Completely different environment. Night and day, really. South Florida was doing very well back then. It had, real blossoming center city in Miami. And it also had many Cuban Americans, Cuba being obviously an issue right back in the news over the last few days. And I would, kind of some of my better friends, and I just, you would sort of have like fraternity parties, small talk and things like that. And inevitably, especially, it was my first exposure really to people that came from such a dramatically different background than I had. And it's certainly an argument in support of diversity being a valuable trait, at least in this case. I was just glued to it. I could not, I knew communism was bad and I had read about it, but I certainly never recall any courses on it. You could have said, if you told me that communism had killed 100 million people, and back in my freshman year of college, I'm quite sure I would not have had any idea of the magnitude of human cost that this perverse system of government has imposed on people of the world. So when I heard these stories, which included both the downside of having, generations of land stolen, of people being deceived and lied to by Castro, of the violence that was inherent in Castro's revolution, and in the way he used propaganda to bring people to this ideology, which no one in their right mind would have done voluntarily. I again started to ask myself the same question on a very different issue. Why isn't government doing something about this? Why are we just letting, these millions of people 90 miles off our shores suffer under this tyranny that we all viewed, I think correctly back then, as a threat, in the sense that everyone knew of the Cuban Missile Crisis and everyone knew of the Soviet Union's aggressive behavior in our hemisphere. So I dived right into things. I mean, I went through the National Journalism Center program, a program that I have routinely spoken very highly of, that is in Northern Virginia now. It used to be on Capitol Hill, for aspiring, I don't want to call them conservative journalists, but non-progressive journalists. People go in to actually do the job, not to impose their ideology on others. I worked, there with Stanton Evans, who was a big conservative author. Through the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, I ultimately went out to Mecosta, Michigan, and met Russell Kirk, who was sort of the leading paleo-conservative thinker at that time. Came into contact and was reading, started reading like Commentary magazine and Norman Podhoretz, probably the leading neoconservative at that time. And I didn't graduate immediately to any niche of conservatism, but I immediately decided that I was an anti-communist, that what was being done to these people was wrong, that the hardworking people of the Rust Belt, where I grew up, seemed to not be being treated fairly, a term Trump ended up using, but probably one I would have used back then as well. And that led, in turn to me diving into things like I always do, pretty aggressively. I went out with the Contras in Nicaragua with a fellow student from George Washington University, who's now a leading foreign policy expert in Washington, D.C. And we spent a week out on the front lines, to my knowledge, to this day. And I just did an appearance a few months ago on One American News, really for the first time, talking about, kind of like how we came to decide as, I think I was 19, he was like maybe 21, how we concluded this was a good idea to do. And we had no fear whatsoever. It was, but we did it, and we came back and we told the story of the Reagan doctrine, not in a hypothetical way, not in an academic way, really relayed from the mouths of the people who lived it and who were, engaged in that conflict against the Soviet and Cuban-backed Sandinista dictatorship. incredibly then run by Daniel Ortega, and to this day still run by Daniel Ortega. And I dived into a lot of the niche areas of Nicaragua, like the story of Violeta Chamorro and La Prensa, which was one of their only independent newspapers, still publishing, constantly harassed by the Marxists, and liberation theology, which I hadn't ever really come to know or pay much attention to, I dived into. And then, there were just some really iconic names active in that generation of upcoming conservative activists, journalists, political leaders, etc. I did a second internship then the next summer with my congressman from Pennsylvania, a guy named Don Ritter, who is just, I think the world of him. He was, I think at the time, the only scientist in the U.S. Congress. He was immensely interested in the climate debate, but wasn't like in it for rhetoric or partisan points. Like, he really understood the science of it and where some of the extremist positions on both sides were falling short. And he spoke Russian fluently, and he also was a champion of the Reagan doctrine, and was probably one, if you saw the movie Charlie Wilson's War, which if you're interested in that era, it's a great movie to watch with Tom Hanks playing Congressman Charlie Wilson. He sort of depicted as leading the charge to get U.S. aid to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion. But Ritter was, in my view, just as effective and was on the front lines of that battle. So let me run through this. So then I graduated with a degree in economics from the University of Miami. I did a summer abroad at Cambridge University in the UK, where I was forced Darwin impact on just about every conceivable academic discipline you could imagine. Again, and even then, I'm not sure that I really thought through the broad ramifications of that. But like these academics had, felt that Darwin impacted everything. Darwin, impacted the humanities. Darwin impacted the economy, the survival of the fittest. It was at the time I had an uneasy feeling about it, and yet, I went to Darwin's house, saw a lot of the UK, saw some of Europe. So I graduate, and now it's I'm pondering, I got into a few law schools, and I wasn't terribly enthusiastic about being an attorney. It seemed like a lot of time to spend and a lot of money to spend to go do that and not be in love with it. But I was in love with Reagan, who was then in his second term. I believed he had the country largely on the right course, but sort of like the Trump term, he also had people in his administration who didn't subscribe to his vision. And there was, an internal struggle and battle within the Republican Party itself at that time. So if you go, I start looking around, and Dinesh D'Souza, probably, I would suppose, one of the best-selling nonfiction authors of our time at this point, and also a successful filmmaker, and now a podcaster as well. So you have competition. He was someone I knew from when he was at Dartmouth, and I kind of reached out to him and somehow learned that there was an opening for an editor at Policy Review magazine, which the Heritage Foundation was then publishing. It was their flagship publication. And I was hired there as an editor. We had a great team, so Dinesh is someone many people have read and I've heard speak. And, that was a great interaction. He and I we're friends and always talking about these issues, and not from the same background. I mean, he was a guy from Mumbai, and I was a guy from outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. So that was a little bit different. There were a few other people in there who were just incredibly bright that I learned a lot from. I started integrating in the Heritage Foundation with some other departments. I went to Africa a few times, and Asia, and the former Soviet Union during the Cold War, Moscow and what was then Leningrad. And I, a guy, one of the foreign policy analysts in the foreign policy and defense department left to go work for the Bush Quayle re-election campaign, and I applied for that job and got it, which was awesome. It was one of the most enjoyable jobs I've ever had. And I handled foreign policy for a considerable part of the world, like a lot of the parts that people didn't want to work on. South Asia, parts of Latin America, Caribbean, and very heavy on Africa. I went out with Jonas Savimbi, who was a less than perfect, but US-backed leader in fighting our Cold War battles. And I went out with the Sihanouk forces in Cambodia, and I, started writing really extensively, both for the Heritage Foundation, policy papers that you do as a foreign policy analyst, and speaking on these issues. And I just had boundless energy at that time. So I saw, which confuses me about today, because it seems to me that we have a lot of conservatives who sort of do just enough to get by, whereas I was always looking for what more could I do? Who else could I help? It wasn't even just about me. I loved the idea of feeling that I was part of a bigger movement, and I feel I was part of a bigger movement. So ultimately, the Cold War ends, and those are some core issues of mine. And I had an opportunity presented to go work with Governor Tom Kean, who you may recognize not just as a successful two-term governor in New Jersey and a Republican who could win statewide there, but also who went on to chair ultimately the 9/11 Commission. And I did a lot of the outreach for him on a lot of his board memberships. He was chairing a innovative educational, generally pro-choice, charter school effort. He was involved in an environmental group that I worked on. He I believe, chaired Jack Kemp's low-income housing commission. Everybody wants low-income housing, but nobody wants to put it in their areas. That's an ongoing, real serious policy challenge that conservatives need to look more closely at, like Section 8 housing and things like that. And then I helped get him on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, which, aside from the few trips that he had taken as governor for trade purposes, was the first time he really dug into foreign policy. I mean, you think about just kind of being in the right place at the right time. I've thought about that, like, wow, 9/11 happens, Kissinger gets appointed, and ultimately is conflicted on it because of all of his business dealings with the Saudis. And they turned to Kean because he fortunately had this foreign policy experience in addition to, his overall political policy and organizational management skill sets. I read an op-ed for the New York Times for him on why I felt Bush 41 deserved another 4 years. I wish I could find that piece. It's going to be a pretty crucial part of my life. I laid out like three main arguments, as to why Bush was better on these very important issues than Bill Clinton was. And I think it was like the economy, national security, foreign policy, and I think I might have looked at education and environment as a third. and maybe some of the vast experience that Bush had. I mean, because, you know, whatever you think of him, and he's obviously less popular in this era than he was back then, 90% approval rating after liberating Kuwait. He was an incredibly credentialed and skilled leader. You know, run the CIA, run the RNC, one of the first envoys we had to China, knew a lot about China. And I was hired as a White House speechwriter to President Bush, who then goes on to lose to Clinton. In 93, I go to work for a place called the International Republican Institute, which is funded by the U.S. State Department, U.S. Agency for International Development. I go all over the world telling emerging democracies in the post-Cold War how to structure civil society and how to build democracies, which seems pretty pompous of me now, given what we've just gone through here on November 3, in my view. I'll look forward to hearing your view on that as well. But, you know, so I developed program ideas. I worked a lot on empowering women's organizations, which, you know, I mean, women are suppressed in a lot of parts of the world in really ways that are profoundly negative, both on obviously the individual basis, but even in a collective, you know, national and country basis. And on, you know, on elections themselves, I was in Namibia for the first independent election that they had when they broke away from South Africa. In fact, I wrote a big Wall Street Journal op-ed on that. John McCain was chairing this thing at the time. And he was very bent on putting in the son of his Hanoi Hilton roommate to run the place, I guess. And I sort of had this other major finally, you know, the first time I ever heard from a corporate recruiter about a job opportunity in the pharmacy with Eli Lilly and Company in Indianapolis, and that kicked off my healthcare career. And I worked at some of the more successful companies. At a company called Zentiva Health Services, which was a Fortune 1000 NASDAQ traded company, 1.5 billion in revenue. I ran investor relations, got all kinds of Wall Street coverage on the company, handled crisis communications, and you can't believe how many crises there are in a big national healthcare company. It's like every day stuff comes at you, and then the investor relations outreach, we had obviously SEC obligations with quarterly earnings and filing of SEC documentation, annual reports, and then the battle of trying to sell people on the company and its prospects, and to do it within the parameters of the law. And there's a lot of SEC restrictions on what you can and can't do, quiet periods, and anybody who's been through that understands how difficult that all becomes. And the outside world doesn't understand it that well. So I'm pretty much, I got to say, you know, I'm still showing up in political gatherings and things, but, you know, Bush 43 comes in, and a lot of my friends went into the administration, but I kind of felt like I wanted to really develop this healthcare career, and I felt I was doing positive, good things for people. That's so important to me. I'm not saying that to sound pretentious or anything. It's just when I feel like I'm doing work that's not meaningful to people or to others, it brings me down. And when I feel like I am doing that, I mean, I'm just really usually very effective at it. From there, I went down. So I had a really good set of credentials in healthcare, both in pharmaceuticals and home health, specialty pharmaceuticals, which is like infusion and injectable therapies, which are very complicated, often administered at home by nursing AIDS and their life-dependent drugs in many cases. And I helped orchestrate a $450 million division sale while I was there. I get hired by a national medical device company, ran a division there, grew it from 3.8 million to 30 million. So I'm sort of like feeling like a capitalist and starting to realize that entrepreneurship, well, it wasn't like my earliest mindset back in those college days, was a real skill set that I just sort of had. I mean, no one really, unlike public policy, where I think I learned from other people, many of the things I did entrepreneurially just came to me. And a lot of them were never done before in some of the corporate entities that I was with. And that's always fun when you're trying to operate in those bureaucratic structures and sell people on the fact that they should have been doing something that they hadn't been doing for 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, I think everybody understands that. Then 2009, February, as I must have recalled, gone through now 1,000 times. It's in 200 books, and
I think that's where we actually met too. Was that conversation about the Tea Party?
Yeah. Well, what's weird is when you're going through something historical, and you don't look. I didn't, and I don't think anyone on that call felt. Well, maybe some did. I certainly didn't anticipate that we were going to develop what really ultimately became the largest and most politically effective grassroots movement in American history, with tens of millions of Americans who got involved in some way. So we had this call after the famous Rick Santelli rant, and the idea, which we floated out there, and the people on the call were almost all zero political experience, zero public policy experience, and not even really much in the way of traditional work experience. Nothing wrong with that. They brought lots of passion, and we're really concerned, as a lot of Americans are at this very moment, about where Obama and Biden at the time had us headed. And they were concerned on a whole bunch of issues: job security, wages, what he was doing to healthcare. I mean, everyone had a bad sort of instinctual feeling that he was up to something sneaky and no good with that, which generally turned out to be the case. So we decided which I thought seemed, not terribly ambitious, but important, to organize these rallies on April 15th, Tax Day, 2009. So we start setting them up, and the phone just starts ringing. I mean, like people would find out that there was one in, like Columbus, Ohio, but there was not one in Cincinnati, and why not? And they just blossomed. It was really supply and demand. I mean, people wanted to be involved, and I've thought a lot about it. I really believe there's even a psychological component to why they wanted to be involved. I think they sensed that things were going in the wrong direction, and I think they literally couldn't sleep at night knowing that they hadn't done something, and hopefully the best they could to do that. And the sad reality is, you look at political engagement even now, and in the 3 years since we've talked, it's still largely the same. There's not really a lot of opportunities. Like the experiences I had, which seemed perfectly natural, you learn wholly unnatural and totally impossible to even if I were going to go back and replicate it, I don't know if I could do it. Literally, if I had the blueprint right in front of me,
it's funny, Michael, and I, unfortunately, we are already pressed for time, which is amazing. But this episode, we sat down beforehand, we were texting and setting up what the agenda was going to be, out the window, because what this ended up being for the conversation was more so
me running my mouth.
No, but it felt like I almost felt like a history of the conservative movement that we see today.
Yeah.
Through your lens. It's almost like, it's funny. I just watched on Netflix. They just released it's a new series. It's actually season 2 of a series, and it's how they made like I forget the name of the series. It's gonna drive me crazy, but it's like how they made the films that we loved or whatever. And they did Forrest Gump, and like you see in Forrest Gump, like kind of his role in everything, and you pretty much have had a role in, I dare say, all significant areas.
I actually categorized this recently as it related to defending CPAC, which, as you know, is sort of coming under some attack, is not being as serious as it used to be and becoming, a circus of sorts. But I don't believe that. The first CPAC back in 1974 was Reagan's iconic City on the Hill speech. And you can find the audio, and I don't think there's video, but audio of it online. It's definitely worth listening to. You can just see the gift, the oratorical political gift and the leadership gift that he had back then. And he was bold. He attacked his enemies. He wasn't bashful about it, as nice of a man as he was. And then you think about, like I described that as sort of the Buckley era of conservatism, meaning we had this intellectual movement that was really formidable, kind of like I would say the libertarian movement is today. I mean, no one can question that libertarianism is a hugely viable, large movement. It just hasn't resonated politically for a number of reasons. So that was the Buckley era that I describe as sort of like 55 to 1980, or you could take it up to maybe Reagan's first run. Then we go through the Reagan era, which was one where we learned that conservative ideas didn't just work. We knew that in the Buckley era, but we didn't know if we were going to have the opportunity to actually be able to apply them to practical challenges, problems, and see them work. Reagan proved we could win politically. And 1980 was as big of a revolutionary victory as 2016 was, in my view. And those two terms were transformational in the way a lot of Americans looked at public policy. But we, along the way, and I don't want to say I told you so, but sometimes I just have a weird instinctual feeling about this. I was raising the human rights abuses in China. I was talking about it, as I did with the Bethlehem Steel example, these trade issues. And I was talking about the immigration problems, which, like Simpson Mazzoli seems like it was yesterday. And that was like the whole Gang of Eight back then, where they were, we were promised all this border security in exchange for amnesty, and that this will be the last time the Democrats ever asked for amnesty. And of course, the amnesty came in like 5 seconds. The border security never came. And now they're asking for more and more amnesty. And we've got an estimated 2 million illegals that are going to enter this country, along with a lot of fentanyl and, a lot of bad things with this border. So I go Buckley era is sort of the intellectual consolidation of ideas. And I would say Russell Kirk was part of that too. And a lot of it was, and Pat Buchanan was to some extent. It was, don't push the country off the edge. It was kind of trying to set up some reasonable parameters for the radical 60s left that, like much of the radical left today, has no such constraints. And they were very successful in doing that. And then 80 to 2016, Reagan proves we're not going to win every election, and there's ways to go about winning, and there's ways to go about losing, but our ideas are formidable. We've proven that they can work. And, it used to be when you were called the tax and spend liberal, it was a death sentence politically. But along the way, we overlooked the CCP, China's Communist Party, and what it's been doing, the magnitude. I mean, we could talk for 3 hours. I could talk for 3 hours about what they've been doing. Immigration, both legal and illegal, and the impact that it's had on this country. It is true, and anyone can say it, that we built this country as a country of immigrants, but we were also once a country of slavery. I mean, just because something once was true doesn't mean it's perpetually true. And when you have 10 million Americans out of the workforce because of this pandemic, as we do right now, the last thing you need to be doing is bringing in another 2 million unskilled laborers the majority of whom don't even speak the English language. And then there was trade. This trade was always described as free trade. And it was free trade on our side, but not on their side. And that was all the difference in the world. And we surrendered a lot of our manufacturing base. And we basically, as Trump correctly said, built the second largest economy in the world today in China by not paying close enough attention. And I'll give you one tangible example on this. I remember approaching Winston Lord, who was one of our ambassadors to China, a real kind of sinologist of the Kissinger school of thought, and just saying, why is it in our, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not even 30 years old at this point, so it was easy to kind of ask provocative questions and make it seem like it was innocent, but I meant it when I asked it. I'm like, why would we want to see a communist country become more economically powerful? It's going to enable them to build out their military, to enhance their domestic and international surveillance and intel operations, to build out their domestic human rights in abusing infrastructure. And and of course, all those things have happened, and they're now an official genocidal regime labeled such by the U.S. government. The response was, no, Michael, look, the key to liberalization in China is the economy growing. That'll build out the middle class. The middle class won't put up with this tyrannical behavior from the CCP. They'll demand change either in an evolutionary way or a revolutionary way. And the country will assimilate as a good player among other countries in the world, and our relationship will be fine. And boy, everybody in the field of sinology and everybody in foreign policy, it seems, in both ideologies and in both parties back in the 80s and 90s, swallowed that fish, line, and sinker. I never did, but I was respectful of the people who were saying it, and I've watched it play out. And then thankfully Trump comes forward in 2016 and says, let me tell you what's really been going on here. And now we got two issues that got to get resolved, in my view, for us to move forward. Number one is they need to be held accountable for the pandemic. I believe they were engaged in gain of function research in that viral lab. We need Fauci and a bunch of other names that people won't recognize, so I won't mention them, need to be grilled on what were they doing funding this place? I mean, Congress clearly wasn't aware of it, right? I mean, it was just like it didn't follow any of the traditional constitutionally required methodologies for how federal monies are to be spent. Congress seemed to have no oversight on it, and here we are funding this biology research, the most dangerous biology research you can do, and even the people in NIH are acknowledging the pandemic risk, but they're saying it's worth the risk because the information that will be obtained will largely offset, losing 1 million or more people, which kind of gives you some insight of how they view individual rights and even human life. That's got to get resolved, and they need to be held accountable. I think we're headed for, I'm not optimistic about the future of our relationship with CCP. I'm not optimistic about what I think they're going to be up to in Taiwan. You clearly saw they broke their 50-year commitment with Hong Kong. I fear for those brave kids. I mean, and all the bold things they did. I have so much admiration for. I know they were inspired by our Tea Party movement too. Many of them communicated that routinely. They admired the United States of America. And then in November, I don't know what your view is, but here's what I've done. I've read the Navarro reports, 3 editions of it. I've read many of the affidavits. I've spoken to people who filed affidavits. And in these 6 states, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, is that 6? I think it's it. It's clear to me that you've got procedural violations and allegations of outright fraud and evidence. I mean, how many times do we keep hearing no evidence, no evidence, no evidence? Well, what is an affidavit, by the way? Affidavits were created as evidence. They're admitted as evidence under penalty of perjury. And there's thousands of these things. So I'm pleased that Maricopa County is hopefully going to be coming out with, their reports and results. I have every reason to believe that that's going to overturn Arizona. I know it's going to face a lot of opposition and pushback too. Georgia is probably, along with Pennsylvania, the 2 states that were the most corrupt and were the most consciously manipulated. Pennsylvania is going now, some good members of the state assembly at work on it. And Nevada, Michigan, and Wisconsin got to get it going. I know there's members in each one of those state assemblies that are aware, but let's just take the most simple thing. And I'll just close with this idea and ask this rhetorically, because let's assume this audience is split. Some people just say, hey, look, people were tired of Trump and Biden really did get over 80 million votes, even though he can't get, 200 people in a gymnasium to hear him. I mean, there's literally no enthusiasm for this man. You look at the people who voted in Clark County in Nevada who had moved out of Clark County, right? This is all in the Navarro reports. DOJ, FBI, they're not looking into it. How, as a matter of process and practice and commitment to representative democracy, do we not, go back to those votes, remove them for starters, since they're fraudulent, and hold the people accountable by whatever, I don't know what the statute or the criminal penalty is, but it's probably not jail time, but it's probably more serious than a speeding ticket. How is it possible that the country's just sort of going, whatever, drop boxes that are put in all these Democrat areas without state legislatures ever authorizing them? They have state constitutional authority over election processes. So, like your libertarian colleagues and friends who probably weren't crazy about Trump for other reasons, but are crazy about the Constitution, you can't pick your battles on this stuff, And historically, we haven't. We fought the tiniest battles because of the symbolism involved. Now we got a knife right in the heart of the centerpiece of our Constitution, a government that's selected by the people, not imposed on us. And I am discouraged, disappointed. I don't get frightened, but I probably would be if I did, about how unseriously the country appears to be taking this, even though the polling numbers show, despite the media blackouts and all the biased pro-Biden coverage, that pushing up on half the country understands it. So where's the action? Where is Ronna McDaniel at the RNC, who raised, I think, $1.4 billion in this election cycle? And even the formal Trump legal process. Give me a call. I don't understand it. I mean, I don't. I think $300 million was raised for that, roughly, and I don't understand why we got a guy running the pillow company basically at the lead of it. I mean, that is an incredible leap of faith, and this is a great American. But could you ever imagine Democrats or progressives letting that happen? And then, and so if anyone is out there says Michael Johns won't say one critical thing about Trump, and I guess I probably didn't, and I'm not even sure I'm saying it now, but at least procedurally, are people looking at this? Is the MAGA movement, which we need to keep together, inspire, and I'm supporting Trump again, but for him to be effective, you got to recognize some of these deficiencies. Is anyone looking at this process and saying, yeah, that's an acceptable way to go about it with the magnitude of stake that is at play here, and knowing how difficult it would be even if we had the best people in the world? If I had new information like I had months ago, I'm not even sure who I would turn it over to. Who would you? Let's assume you had, you had a lot of stuff down there in Bucks County, Montgomery County. Let's assume, we still have this mysterious truck driver who came from Long Island. He was interviewed, by the way. They didn't care about the details. They just wanted to know how he found Trump allies and why he was talking about it, which is pretty terrifying. But let's assume you found something down, your way, and it was meaningful to the outcome, of the election, and it might even be suggestive of a national tactic that had broad ramifications. Who's running this thing that you would hand it to? Because Sidney Powell, who seems out of it completely, I don't even know what she's doing now. I think she's writing a book. Jenna is like doing TV stuff. Rudy Giuliani, one of the greatest Americans, an icon, is back at WABC doing a great podcast. It's worth listening to. But I don't get the sense really that he's been given a managerial oversight. Who's managing this thing? I mean, that's like, and I can't imagine, there's not many people closer to it than me. There's one or two people, and they're so paranoid they don't text. They don't like to text. Well, there's a lot of paranoia out there right now about what is going on, and I don't want to make light of any of this. I always hope for the best. I always thought back in 2009 that things did look really bleak, but I took, as you know, and it's all out there. I mean, I said, we're going to take our country back. How are you going to do that? They've got the White House, they've got the media, they've got the House, they've got this. I go, just trust me, we're going to do it. We're going to do it because I know we're going to do it for a whole bunch of reasons, including the fact that our ideas are work and theirs don't. Right now is a frightening moment. And the way Trump described it at the in Tampa at that TPUSA gathering, I think it was down there, or at one of these recent rallies where you started Route 3, you had people in solitary confinement. I mean, for walking into that building, they should never have done that, and I condemn it. But and media being censored, nothing being done. So it's everything we've warned about is happening. What are we going to do about it? We need to figure it out. Good to see you,
Michael Johns. No, I appreciate the conversation. So what we're going to do, because this is, I think, a starting off point, and I really want to let you go there because this is how we're going to go ahead. And I think maybe start off a conversation when we're talking to folks more on the right, the conservative folk, who I don't think we really want. I say want in the liberty world. They say we don't want to talk to conservatives. We don't want to talk to liberals. But at the same point in time, right now, majority of conservatives, majority of liberals are the ones making the policy. So we need to have the conversations, but we need to know how we got here. And we're going to go through an actual sales process. You got to trace the history. So that's why we want to go through the history. But with that being said, yes, guest is in the queue for the next show. I got to run, unfortunately, but Michael Johns, we'll include all the links to your social media in the show notes. Easily the starting off point for this conversation going forward. Thank you so much.
I'm a servant leader. If I can be helpful to anyone out there, who believes in our country, and you're looking for guidance, you're struggling with what to do. One of the things I really take seriously is trying to be helpful to others. I'm a team. We got to function as a team, and I'm all about that. We need a lot more of it. Good to see you, Brian.
Good to see you too, Michael. Thanks again for joining the program. Alrighty, folks, that's going to wrap up Story Time special edition here with Michael Johns. Really a great chance to get not only a conservative's perspective on all these different, very important moments in American history, but to really see how we got to where we are and how the policy we got to that as well. So thank you, Michael, for joining the program and outlining that today. Folks, if you enjoyed the episode, love to hear about it. So please make sure you give Michael a shout. Also, would love to hear as well at B Nichols Liberty, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok if you want to get in touch. Also, if you want to get in touch, if you're heading down to Orlando, Florida, come up here next week. Where did time go? August 5th through the 7th, I will be down at Revolution 21, joining our friends at Young Americans for Liberty over on Media Row, having conversations with the movers and shakers here in the greater Liberty world. So excited to be down there. Also hanging out with good friend Chris Goizetta. And of course, we'll be having an opportunity for you guys to get some pictures, order some swag, and really talk all things sales and marketing. So again, looking forward to seeing you guys if you are down there. Also, folks, if you want to go ahead and support the Brian Nichols Show, how can you do that? Head to briannicholsshow.com/shop. There you can go ahead and purchase all the amazing swag over at the Brian Nichols Show shop at Proud Libertarian. And guys, of course, you can get our classic most ever wanted don't hurt people, don't take people's stuff bumper sticker. By the way, if you're down at Revolution 21, stop by. You might go ahead and get one of these if you go ahead and stop by the booth. I don't know. We'll see. But with that being said, yes, briannicholsshow.com/shop. The bumper sticker, we have our amazing t-shirts, like our brand new Don't Trust or Stop Trusting Government Bureaucrats t-shirt. We have our Cool Mask Bro, as well as Don't Nuke Me Bro t-shirts and hoodies. Our Question Everything t-shirts, bumper stickers, and our Good Ideas Don't Require 4 snapbacks and more. So if you want to go ahead and check out that amazing stuff we have there to definitely pique some interest, briannicholsshow.com/shop. Also, if you want to go ahead and become a supporting listener of the program, how can you do that? briannicholsshow.com/support. That'll bring you to our Patreon. And it's our Patreon, really, that is a great chance for us to not only talk to you guys directly one-on-one, because this is also where not only is my morning sales huddle, I shoot this over here as well. So my Patreon users get that first and foremost before everybody else. And then we actually shoot that out with our morning email list, which I'll talk about in a second. But Patreon, $5 or $10 a month is how you can go ahead and support the program, either an entry-level sales or account-level executive. Yes, I showed it here in the video a second ago. The Don't Hurt People, Don't Take People's Stuff bumper sticker gets sent right to our awesome patrons. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and give them a shout out right now. Daryl Schmitz, Laura Stanley, Michael Lemmel, Mitchell Mankiewicz. There we go, Mitchell. Sorry. Hody Johns, Craig DaCosta, and the greater We Are Libertarians channel. Thank you for supporting the program. If you want to go ahead again and help support the program, briannicholsshow.com/support. And yes, I mentioned the morning sales huddle. I send that every morning via email. You can go ahead and sign up for that when you get the amazing ebook, 4 easy steps you can implement now to help sell liberty to friends and family. And yes, once you go ahead and get that ebook, it'll put you into the Brian Nichols Show email list, where you'll get our morning sales huddle 5 days a week. Today we talked about messaging, super important. Actually, if you go listen to Dave Smith over on Nick Gillespie's The Reason Interview, they talk about this messaging and how important it is. We have thoughts here in the Brian Nichols Show, right, and how to articulate effective messaging. And we have, of course, our good friends, Chris Goizetta, talking about knowing our audience, but also, and this is leading us to coming up here on the program here on Monday, Jeremy Todd, talking all things sales. So yes, we're going to be talking all things sales with Jeremy as we go forward here on Monday's episode. But yes, between now and then, I don't know what's going to happen. Sunday, no candidate yet for our Sunday candidate highlight series. So TBD, stand by. We might have a special episode, a special guest. We will see. But I do know all things for certain. Monday, you will have our conversation of sales with our good friend, Jeremy Todd. So with that being said, folks, it's Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Michael Johns. We'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.